I'm on my old laptop, so if you notice sound or image difference, that's the reason why. But might actually work out. It makes it convenient for me to actually look at um, the copy, the news piece that I want to read out. But before I get into that, a little disclaimer. Um, this video, may be interpreted by some as me doing a U-turn or backtracking on what I said previously regarding the public order bill. I don't see it that way, and I hope it doesn't come across that way. In that video, I edited the title to be "Why I Cautiously Support the Bill," and that was, with some assertiveness on my part because I uh, I support it because I see it as something that's been brought about by the actions of extremists, people who want to hurt the public, people who want to hijack the public. And I do think it's absolutely paramount that something is done about them, about the likes of Just Stop Oil. I don't think they're peaceful protesters. I think they are, um, there's nothing peaceful about maliciously trying to hurt the public. That's not peaceful. Just because they're not throwing punches and bombs does not make them peaceful. And I maintain that that's a bit, cloaked up to be something that's not. Um, but I've also been consistent in my belief in police accountability. And I don't think that there's a contradiction here. Some people are either well on the left and they would have the police totally disbanded if they had the way. But then there's also reactionary conservatives who have this kind of blind defense of the police no matter what. Now, as a centrist, I I don't see a contradiction in supporting the police whilst insisting on police accountability. I don't think there's a contradiction there. And I don't think it's a case that if you criticise the police, you're anti-police, or if you support the police, you're blind to um, problems that do occur. So I'm going to read this out. It's a little bit troubling. Before I do, though, again, a little bit of context. This is about Coronation Day, and it's about one particular arrest, but I'm sure this wasn't the only such case where this happened. Um, I broadly stand by the things I was saying based on the information that was available then. The Metropolitan Police had information. They had um, information that there were going to be activists setting off rape alarms in order to scare horses from the likes of Just Stop Oil. Now, you can imagine if that had transpired. If they had done such a stupid thing, the horses bolted, potentially a rider would be killed, it would cause a panic. As it turned out, the day was trouble free. There was no violence, there was no disorder, there was, so if nothing else, I do think we have to commend the Metropolitan Police for that. I mean, they've had to deal with some exceptionally large events recently, usually connected with the monarchy, it has to be said. The Queen's State funeral was a huge security operation, and they say the coronation was even bigger because you have visiting heads of state, you have thousands of people, you have VIPs, and of course the monarch and his family themselves. So it's a huge security operation. And I think people need to have some understanding of the position that the police are in. When they have information that there's going to be hardcore activists who might cause trouble. I know there's a controversy over preemptive um, action, but really, if they have that information, I don't think they can be complacent. And I think if it's a choice between um, being quite hardline and taking a hands-off approach, I think the former is more practical. But, and this is very big, but common sense has to be applied, and it's quite clear on the day some of that wasn't. So I'm going to read out this report because it's quite disturbing and I think disgraceful, and then summarise my thoughts afterwards. So bear with me. It shouldn't be too long. The report's by Steve Robson in the newspaper. Royal superfan arrested and locked up for 13 hours at Coronation for standing near protesters. The irony here is this was a royalist who was arrested. This wasn't one of the Republican protesters. A royal superfan was arrested and held by police for 13 hours. That's, half a day, because she happened to be stood next to a group of Just Stop Oil protesters ahead of the King's coronation. Alice Chambers, 36, had travelled alone to the mall in central London on Saturday and was eagerly awaiting a glimpse of King Charles when she found herself being handcuffed by Metropolitan Police officers who burst into the crowd as reported here. The architect, who is originally from Australia but has lived in London for 7 years, said she had no idea she happened to be sitting beside the group as they had not started protesting. And I think that's very plausible because a lot of them weren't making their Just Stop Oil thing very obvious. They'd hidden it. And, I think that's very plausible. I don't think, I believe that. Miss Chambers said she was told she was arrested on suspicion of potential to cause a breach of the peace at around 9 a.m., along with a dozen other people in scenes captured by Sky News cameras. So, it seems to be a collective sort of thing they took there. Well, let's just arrest everyone in the vicinity. I was just sitting on my little stool and I noticed there was some yelling, and then some police swooped in and were pushing the crowd back, she told I must have been right on the edge of that. I went up and two police officers just grabbed me and handcuffed me. I don't think they said anything. I think they arrested me before they asked a question. I feel like once I was in the system, they didn't listen. I tried to explain that I wasn't part of the group. I feel like once I was in the system, they didn't listen. That's, probably a recurring problem, and I think it's a big problem. Um, there's a picture of her here, looking like she's going to Ascot. She clearly doesn't look like a Just Stop Oil protester. During the 13-hour ordeal, Miss Chambers said she was repeatedly questioned, subjected to physical searches, held in a cell, and had her DNA, fingerprints, and mugshot photo taken before the Met Police finally realised she was an innocent bystander. In other words, they treated her like a criminal. She said it wasn't until two senior officers interviewed her at 7 p.m., so, among other things, she's missed the day. More than 10 hours after she was arrested, the police acknowledged they'd made a mistake. I think the only question they asked me was, "Why were you on the mall?" said Miss Chambers. I explained the whole thing. How I went down there at 7 a.m., like everyone else did, to get a good spot. How I went one way and it was all blocked. It was blocked, and I ended up walking back to where there seemed to be some space. They looked at each other and then they just asked, "Have you ever heard of Just Stop Oil?" I said, "Up until today, no." That's a little surprising if she's in the UK, but it's frankly irrelevant since she wasn't anything to do with them. Because you know this because Just Stop Oil is very vocal and they're very proud of what they do. So if she wasn't Just Stop Oil, she wouldn't be denying it. I mean, they're very proud of what they do. They said, "We have no further questions and we're really sorry you've been caught up in this." Well, very nice of them to apologise. They've just wasted your day, caused you all the stress and inconvenience. But, oh, well, it's fine. That was the point I started crying and got emotional. That was the first time anyone had been able to listen to my side of the story. I asked them, was there anything I could have done that would have meant I didn't end up here? Um, Miss Chambers said even after officers acknowledged the mistake, it was another 2.5 hours before she was able to leave Wandsworth Police Station in South London at 10 p.m. That's inexplicable. Inexplicable and disgraceful. Disgraceful. I mean, why? It comes as the Met Police has faced a barrage of criticism over the arrest of 64 people, 52 the last time I saw, around the King's Coronation on Saturday, with new anti-protest laws used to detain demonstrators from groups including Republican Just Stop Oil. On Monday, the Met was forced into an embarrassing climb down over the arrest of 6 anti-monarch campaigners after the force said it found no evidence they were planning to disrupt the event. Met Chief Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley later defended his office's actions, claiming police had received intelligence that protesters were intending to throw paint at the procession and to vandalise monuments. And that's probably true, but it still doesn't justify, targeting innocent people. Miss Chambers said police offered her help getting home, but she decided to get the tube back to Wapping on her own, a journey of almost an hour across London. I'm guessing she just had enough of being with the police at that point. Everyone on the tube had the most incredible day, and there's me that had the complete opposite, so it must be a real bittersweet sense. Miss Chambers has been to a number of royal events before and admits her friends find it funny that she likes to go to them on her own. That's what's great about the UK and London, the pomp and the ceremony that's pretty unique in the world, she said. That was what was so devastating. The Trooping of the Colour happens every year, but this was a one-time event. You can't rerun it next year. So, this special day has been ruined for this woman because of the absolute lack of common sense. Miss Chambers has been left upset about what happened and has made a complaint to both the Met Police and the police watchdog, the Independent Office for Police Conduct. I understand why the police were on the edge. They did have a tough job that day, she said, but they need to have better processes and better training in place because innocent people shouldn't be getting locked up for that long. I just want to do as much as I can to get the message out there so it doesn't happen to other people. The Metropolitan Police has been contacted for comment. Of course, I haven't responded. Well, that's a disgrace. Well, what I find particularly galling in this case is even after they knew she was innocent, and they established that 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours. Now, why? That's insane, and it's one of those absolutely infuriatingly stupid things that just shouldn't be happening. After they find out that she really is, who she says she is. Now, I'm prepared to play the devil's advocate a little bit. At the very start, they might think, well, Just Stop Oil is they've infiltrated the crowd. We don't know who you are, just based on your word. Okay, but some common sense should apply. If she was in Just Stop Oil, she almost certainly would have had previous arrests. Okay, so they can check her name with the database, find out there's no previous arrests. That would correspond to what she's saying. The fact that she has no, cutting equipment or oil, paint, or anything like that should demonstrate that she's who she says she is. The very attire that she's in, dressed like she's going to ladies' day, should show she is who she says she is. So to me, it's just an inexplicable, infuriating waste of. Well, I was going to say waste of police resources is a waste of her day. You know, her day's been ruined, but it's worse than that. It's caused, a very unpleasant experience, very stressful experience to be treated like a criminal. And now she's on, her mugshot taken, her DNA taken. That can't be rescinded. So she's now basically being treated like a criminal. Um, this might be a one-off, but I suspect there were a few other incidents that day, a few other arrests that sort of came under a similar bracket. I don't think Graham Smith of Republic probably should have been arrested, even if he was a bit vocal. But I wouldn't go along with those who say that there should have been no arrests. I mean, one of those arrested, for example, had previously thrown eggs at the king, so what the hell did he expect? I've no sympathy for him. I mean, someone like that is a troublemaker, and that's the police absolutely were right to arrest him. But there is a common sense deficit, and it's worse than irritating, it's worse than infuriating, it's actually dangerous. Because where you have this lack of common sense, this inexplicable failure to just see what is obvious, um, I mean, to me, that points to a problem in the training or indeed police culture. They're right and this person is wrong. I think there's an arrogance there. When the police realize they're wrong, instead of sort of apologizing at a later date, they should immediately rectify it, immediately. Let the person go. Don't take up 2 more hours of their day. Um, I think it's right that she's pursuing legal action against them. It's not enough to just say sorry. Why? Because an apology doesn't really change anything. As long as this culture continues, as long as um, this sort of abuse of power continues, then it will happen again. Um, but I don't think there's any contradiction in what I'm saying here. I don't think this is an anti-police position. I just think it is infuriating that the police do stuff like this and think that an apology suffices. It doesn't. It's a disgrace. It's an attack on liberty and it's an abuse of power. On the wider issue of the security operation that day and the public order bill, like I said, without the militant actions of the eco extremists, then that bill wouldn't be necessary. What's entailed in that bill, and I'm not going to read it all out again, I already done this in the previous video, but it specifically refers to, for example, locking on equipment and going to disrupt and interfere with, transport infrastructure. Those are all very serious things that can endanger lives. And those are specifically the tactics that Just Stop Oil have used. Um, whilst I blame Just Stop Oil for a lot of this, I also blame the police for not using common sense. It's a bit like that incident where the journalist was arrested, I think it was the end of last year, when she was merely covering the event. And again, she was held for hours, mugshots taken, held in a cell. As a freelance journalist myself, frankly, it makes me nervous. If I'm doing my job, if I'm interviewing people, even if I have my press card and I've given the police, a polite notice in advance, will they give me a hard time? It is quite concerning, and I just think there is a real deep arrogance and stubbornness in police ranks, where time and time and time again, this sort of problem gets exposed, and their attitude is just to double down and not change the culture. I mean, Mark Riley, I wouldn't put all the blame on him. I think he knows that things have to change, but I think it's a deeper problem actually of culture. I mean, in this incident, this sort of sweeping approach is just arrest everyone in sight. If they stormed in the crowd and she happened to be in physical proximity to them, that is not a reason to arrest someone on suspicion of, intending to cause a breach of the peace. Well, they would have had to provide evidence for that. Now, where was their evidence? That's an abuse of power. And I think what's infuriating for people is they're not accountable. The police think they could get away with it with an apology, and that's, in many cases, they won't even do that. So for me, my feelings after reading this are very mixed because, on one hand, I'm kind of disgusted by it. She should not have been put through that. No one should be put through that if they're innocent. On the other hand, I recognise that it is a major security operation and they were probably going to be more on edge that day than normal. But that's still not an excuse to arrest innocent people. Um, I suppose they would argue we can take no chances. We don't know who she is, who she says she is. But again, common sense should have applied. Check the database. Does she have previous arrests? Does she have any ties to Just Stop Oil? Now, if she'd had previous arrests and she was a member of Just Stop Oil, I could understand her being held. Absolutely. I've no sympathy for Just Stop Oil or any of their members because they have engaged in criminal acts. So really, but that's a different issue. This was an innocent woman, and by the way, the fact that she's a royalist, I'm not just defending her because of that. If she was a Republican, I'd be saying exactly the same thing. If she was an innocent Republican holding a placard, not intending to, aggravate other people or throw things at the king or anything like that, I'd be saying, yeah, that's also heavy handed and wrong. Um, but, I do feel sorry for this lady. She should not have been put through that. Um, and I do hope she pursues legal action because the Metropolitan Police have to learn, they have to get the message they cannot treat people this way in a free country. Yes, they have a difficult job. Yes, they're tasked with keeping us safe. And I give them credit for the day going by without major disorder. But that is with the caveat that this is not justified. They did not have to arrest an innocent woman in order to achieve what they achieved. So it's concerning. I'll put a link to the report as usual. Um, but people might say I'm being a hypocrite here because of the tone of my previous video. I really don't think I am, because at no point have I been complacent about police power. At no point have I said the police should be allowed to do whatever they want. That's never been my position. Never. I do say that, in an organised society, in an ordered society with the rule of law, protesters can't do anything they want. And that's the other extreme. Those who think that peaceful protest means basically you could do whatever you want as long as it is not violent. That's rubbish. There's responsibilities as well. Um, but it really, really is time that police officers faced accountability. So I think the officers that arrest her should be disciplined. That is not going to happen because they'll be able to say, "Oh well, it was the importance of the day, and we were just doing our job." That's not good enough. Individual officers need to be held to account. Because I do think there's rogue officers. You know, it's one thing to blame it all on Sir Mark Rowley, but the Met is a big force, 35,000 personnel. I think there's very corrupt individuals who are in the police for the wrong reasons. We've seen that with David Carrick and Wayne Couzens. I think basically there's some misogynistic thugs in the police. I've no problem saying that because it's the truth. I think that corrupt individuals need to be rooted out and punished, kicked out of the force, and if they have been proven to have committed offences, they need to be arrested. But I'm concerned because this is a situation where it's kind of like the public, offenders, and the police. Now, the police and the public should be on the same side, but whenever the police do stuff like this, they break down trust, and then they have to rebuild it again. And then they say, "Oh, but we're constantly getting negative attention." Well, look at this. This is why. So my message to any good police officers out there is, it's not good enough to say, well, most of us aren't like that. Most of us aren't misogynistic. Most of us aren't corrupt or abuse our position. That's not good enough if you're shielding those who are or denying the problem. I wonder one day will I have to make a video because I'm in this situation where I'm arrested as a freelance journalist for doing my job. And I'll say one more thing that's extremely important. Freedom of the press is so, so precious in a democracy. Without freedom of the press, I wouldn't know about this. No one would. So freedom of the press, I think, is one of the absolute safeguards of democracy, and it must be defended. Let me know your thoughts, and thanks for watching.